Hello. Today I'm going to talk about Keir Starmer, and I must warn you that I'm not going to be very polite about him. Now, he can't help the fact that he's a very dull man with just about zero charisma and a voice like the speaking clock, and that he has very little style and doesn't cut much of a dash on the world stage, despite the fact he desperately wants to. Now, I lost faith in Starmer about 4 years ago when he said that under his leadership the UK would never seek to rejoin the European Union, would never seek to rejoin the customs union or single market, and heaven forbid would agree to freedom of movement. These are all absolute red lines. And these are red lines that he has repeated over and over again since then. The reason I found this unacceptable was I thought it was just stupid. I mean, why would any politician make such a commitment at that stage, not knowing how things were going to work out? I mean, he had no idea how disastrous the consequences of Brexit would be. And so now that we're really floundering, and now that it's very obvious that we made a mistake in leaving the EU, it's still his red lines. We're never ever going to go back in. He talked a lot about renegotiating the deal. You probably remember. He was going to renegotiate the deal because the Conservatives didn't get a very good deal. And what it amounted to, and the EU made it perfectly clear before there were any renegotiations that the only possibility was for tinkering around with a bit of phytosanitary legislation or paperwork and so on, so it's slightly less difficult to import and export food and plants and so on. But very little else. I mean, it was one of his red lines that there'd be no freedom of movement. And so he's extremely reluctant to agree to even young people being able to go and maybe work in the EU for a couple of years and people from the EU coming and working here for a couple of years. No, that might upset the Daily Express. And they'll say he's trying to get back into it. So again, it's all red lines. And things are not going very well. And the outlook is not great, and his own personal popularity is really on the floor. In a YouGov poll only last month, 22% of those who took part said they approve of what he's doing, and 69% said they disapproved. So he's got a net minus 47% disapproval rating, which is extremely high, probably the highest ever, I would imagine, for a UK Prime Minister at this stage. And so he seems to spend all his time rushing all over the world, trying to look as though he's important, trying to get his face in different pictures with different leaders and so on, and not really doing very much because we're not really that an important a country anymore. When we were part of the EU, we were very part of one of the most important blocs in the world. Now we're just another country. And at the same time, the economy is not growing. I think he woke up to the fact a few months ago that we had to grow the economy in order to be able to generate more taxation. And he was on about it all the time, growing for growth. He couldn't hear anything but going for growth. But it hasn't happened. It's not happening. The economy is very much flatlining. Monthly figures are always disappointing. Only today, I think it was shown that our borrowing is way up again this month or last month. And we can't just go on borrowing. The debt interest is huge at the moment, and the amount we're borrowing is absolutely vast. And at the same time, the economy, as I say, is not going anywhere. Because it's not going anywhere, we're not generating the taxes, and we look at public services. I mean, the country is really in an awful mess. And foreigners own so much of our economy now. All utilities are foreign owned, and so many businesses are foreign owned. And we saw at the banquet at Windsor Castle on last week that so many of the big CEOs from the biggest American companies were present, and they're clearly eyeing up the UK as being somewhere they're not. They talk about investing in the UK. What it means is buying up assets cheaply in the UK. Take Blackstone, for example. I mean, they're buying up houses. And we're going to end up in a situation where we're just going to be renting off American property owners in a few years' time. And when you look at how we're going to get any growth, we have almost the most expensive electricity in the whole world. Now, if you're a business and you're competing, particularly if you're in AI and you need all these supercomputers and things, and the cost of electricity is really, really important. And there's no sign of our electricity prices going down. And that applies to everybody else, domestic customers as well. And so that's more money being taken out of the economy. And then worst of all is the cost of houses. Because so many people now are spending such a high proportion of their income on rent or on mortgages. And, the obvious consequence of this is that there's less money to spend. There's less money. By the time you've paid your mortgage, you pay your rent, and you bought your food and paid your utility bills, very often there's nothing left. And so, it's very difficult to see how the economy can regenerate if there's no money being spent. And this whole thing about house prices seems absolutely crazy. I read a figure earlier today that the most expensive housing in the world is in Hong Kong, followed by Singapore, followed by Monaco, followed by Zurich, followed by London. The fifth highest property prices in the world. And house prices have gone up from £88,000 average in 1998 to £270,000 now. In other words, they've gone up 3 times in a matter of less than 30 years. So it's very difficult to see how, with this handicap of property prices and electricity prices, how we can really make any progress. And again, I don't think this is stuff that Starmer really understands. And I think also he hasn't... I think his judgment's very good. He hasn't repealed Tory policies such as the two-child policy, two-child cap on benefits. Well, we desperately need to increase our population, because otherwise the rate at which we're getting older and needing more and more medical equipment, medical treatment and so on, and the fall in the birth rate is going to mean we're going to be in trouble. Immigration, they're absolutely obsessed. Starmer is following Farage's lead, obsessed to do everything possible to make it virtually impossible for any foreigners to come here anymore. So we are heading for trouble. And there are other things where I think his judgment is really hopeless. The Tories brought in, I think it was, it might have been Priti Patel or the other dreadful woman whose name slipped my mind for a moment. Anyway, they brought in something called the Public Order Act, which gave the police these huge powers. Now, to give you an example, and this is the society we're living in at the moment. You may remember a couple of weeks ago that Tommy Robinson, that sort of petty criminal, the guy who's been in and out of prison a half dozen times, just a little thug, had a demonstration in London at which 150,000 other thugs turned up. The guys with the Union Jack T-shirts and so on. 150,000, and there was, you probably saw film on the television of them fighting with the police, fist fights with the police. And of that 150,000, 24 were arrested. Now, a few weeks before, the people supporting pro-Palestine action, peacefully, 2,000 of them turned up, and they held up cards saying they supported Palestine action. Those are the people that sprayed the red paint on the planes. 890 were arrested. So it's 1%, and they're 30 times as many people arrested. A lot of these people being arrested are old people in wheelchairs. Now, what sort of Prime Minister allows that sort of nonsense? Which is the greater threat to society? Which is the greater threat to him, for that matter? Or these Tommy Robinson thugs? Or these old people who are concerned about what's happening in Palestine? And again, he's a follower, not a leader. Right now, we want a leader. We want a leader with strong principles, a bit of charisma, and somebody with a bit of determination. But we've got this sort of this waffling jelly at the moment, and it's when you look at immigration, because this is Farage's big selling point. Farage is the guy who brought us Brexit, which has destroyed this country, destroyed our economy, and it's destroyed our reputation worldwide. It's made us an absolute laughingstock. And we will never, outside of the EU, get back to where we were before. Farage is responsible. And now Farage is leading a party which, if there were an election tomorrow, he'd almost certainly win it. And his big thing is immigration. He's convincing all these thousands of thousands, again, the Union Jack T-shirt wearers, the guys that read the Daily Express with their fingers. He's telling them all that if we can just stop these boats coming, just stop the boats, our economy will boom. And they're all falling for it. It's the immigrants. They're causing the problem. So Starmer's behind it. He's doing everything possible to stop immigrants coming here. And to come here to work now, you need to get a job before you come, earning something like £37,000 a year. And you then got to pay health insurance, 700 odd quid, about 700 odd quid for a visa and all the rest of it. In other words, unless you're in quite a highly paid job, you're not going to come here. So our shortage of workers is going to get worse and worse. And this is all pandering to Farage and his lot. And we are going to have really serious labour shortages very, very soon. And I think other things, he's terribly cautious on Palestine. I mean, what is happening in Palestine is just absolutely outrageous. And he should stand up and say so, but it's always about the hostages. It's all about the hostages. It's about Hamas. They're not very nice and so on. I mean, tens of thousands of people have been killed, and tens of thousands of women and children have had arms and legs blown off and been blinded, and all the rest of it. And you can't really condemn Israel fully. And so I think we're in a bit of a mess, but I think had we had a better Prime Minister, things wouldn't have been anything like as bad. And I think his judgment on other things like the people he appoints, for example. I mean, you remember Sue Gray. It was a big mistake. She'd been the person who investigated the downstreet parties, and she, as he said, was not the right person for the job, so he got rid of her. The Mandelson thing, which has been much more recent, I mean, that was a very bad appointment, a very stupid appointment. He was appointed apparently before they completed the vetting. I mean, he's always a dodgy appointment anyway, because he's got quite a background as Peter Mandelson, and he has a fascination for people who've got a lot of money and likes to associate with them and so on. And whilst that might have been all right in Trump's Washington, I'm not sure. I'm not sure he was the right choice anyway because of that, but that was a mistake. And then there were people like, you remember Louise Haig, she had to resign over some business about a stolen phone, and there was Tulip Siddiq, whose aunt was the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh, who's now hiding in India because they're chasing her for billions. They say she stole and so on, and there was Rushna Ali last week, and she was accused. She owns a load of properties apparently, which she lets out, and then she kicked out all the tenants and put the properties up again, the prices up, the rents up, and then there was the Angela Rayner thing, which was just sheer stupidity on the part of Angela Rayner, who otherwise seemed to me quite a decent sort. But if there were an election now, I mean, I think Labour would have no chance. I think the amount of support they've lost. I mean, don't forget they were given the benefit of the doubt, and they were seen as being better than the Tories at the last election. And I think a lot of people who lent them their vote would never even dream of doing it again, seeing how badly things are being run at the moment. They have the Labour Party have to worry about above all, I suppose, Farage, who's just sweeping up their supporters, and all these non-entities like Andrea Jenkins and all the rest of them, they're drifting across to join Reform because they see that as some sort of a bandwagon. I don't think anybody stops to think through what would happen if Farage became Prime Minister, because he would never be any good at all. He didn't want to be Prime Minister. He wants to be the stirrer-upper in chief. He just wants to cause controversy and to be the centre of attention. And then, of course, he's the Labour are also vulnerable to Corbyn, and he will take a lot of the left-wing supporters if he does manage to get this party sorted out. Tories, I think, are more or less a lost cause. But it's all a terrible mess. And as I said before, I think what the Labour Party need now, what any government needs now, is a really strong character who's got some charisma and is a bit of determined, and someone who's probably a bit more open-minded and can perhaps think about an alternative to never, ever, ever, ever rejoining the European Union, and instead thinking about how can we get a bit closer and how can we start negotiating towards getting back to where we were, even though it might take years and years and decades probably. Of the people who are available, everybody's talking about Andy Burnham, because there is a lot of talk now already of Starmer being replaced, but Andy Burnham is the one who seems to be favourite. My own pick, and I've mentioned before, I think is head and shoulders above everybody else, both physically and metaphorically, and that is Darren Jones, who I think he's the sort of person we need, someone with a really strong character. But Starmer, he's just a wishy-washy non-entity. I think he should have been Home Secretary. He'd have been a good Home Secretary. But as Prime Minister, Anyway, that's what I think about it. If you've watched this far, thank you very much indeed. And if you haven't already subscribed, I'd appreciate it if you do so. And so until next time, thank you for watching and bye for now.